Hello, I'm Georgina Jalbaud from LexisPSL Private Client, and I've got with me today Mike Walker, partner, and Jeremy Stein, a tax manager from KPMG Private Client Tax Advisory. And I'm just going to ask Mike and Jeremy a couple of questions about ATED. So Mike, how have your clients reacted to ATED? Are they generally paying the tax, or are they de-enveloping?
It's interesting you should ask, because the revenue have asked the question themselves. In fact, they're so perplexed by the reaction to the tax that they've commissioned some independent research. And I've been interviewed by a research company who've asked the same question, because I think the tax was introduced really as a provision to encourage people to de-envelope.
Yeah.
What surprised them is the number of people who actually paid the tax and stayed in the envelope. I think they missed the point. They tried to bring in a rebasing provision, which would allow people to, in theory, escape the envelope with little tax, but the rebasing was at the property level rather than the holding structure level. So they missed the target. And I think a lot of people have taken a view that there are some severe taxes waiting for them, such as inheritance tax of 40% if you remove your envelope, and that the preservation of the envelope and paying the annual tax is a price to pay, and it's worth paying.
Yes, thank you. And I was also interested to know whether you think that the changes to property taxation introduced in this year's autumn statement might make the use of offshore companies more attractive again for non-residents.
I think there's a, thank you Georgina, I think there's a simple answer to that question, which is yes. And then there's a more complex answer to that question, which I'll go into in a minute. But I think if we stay with the simple answer, why would buying a property in an offshore company be more attractive after the autumn statement, or more than before, is we think, why does someone buy a property in an offshore company? Essentially they're buying it because it gives them IHT protection.
Yeah.
If they're not domiciled in the UK, not yet deemed domiciled in the UK, if they hold a UK property in an overseas company, it's non-UK cited for inheritance tax purposes. So never mind stamp duty and stamp duty avoidance, most people who bought properties in overseas companies have done it for inheritance tax reasons. The ATED was introduced as an anti-avoidance measure to encourage people, the double negative, not to envelope, to de-envelope. And one of the measures they introduced was a 15% rate of SDLT if you bought a property through a non-natural person such as a company. Compare 15% under ATED to 7% if you buy a property in your personal ownership. That's a big differential.
Yeah.
As of the autumn statement, the differential is not 15 versus 7, but it's 15 versus 12. That's not such a big differential. If you've got a very valuable property and the inheritance tax advantages are significant, would you necessarily buy the property in personal ownership? Would you necessarily de-envelop? So, not straight. So I think that the simple answer, as I say, is with the changes, some people are more likely to stick with a company and buy a property through a company. The complex answer is you have to look at a range of taxes. The main taxes that you need to look at are stamp duty land tax, the annual ATED charge, annual charge for owning a property in a non-natural person, inheritance tax that I've mentioned, and capital gains tax. I'm not going to go into detail, but let's just take a couple of examples. As I said, SDLT, you're now looking at 15% versus 12%, but of course in personal ownership it's not a flat rate of 12%, you go up through the bands, 0, 2, 5, 10, 12. If you had a property in your personal ownership, you could get main residence relief. You're not going to get that in a company. But you may not get main residence relief under the new changes if you're non-resident, unless certain conditions apply. So owning it personally for capital gains tax may not be so advantageous anymore after the autumn statement. Inheritance tax, the autumn statement doesn't essentially change anything, so I think we're neutral on that one. And capital gains tax I've mentioned. If you're non-resident, you might pay CGT on the property anyway, and you might not get main residence relief. So I would say, I think Mike, you would agree, that the balance has slightly shifted a bit more to holding a property through company, but you've got to weigh up all those taxes and crunch the numbers.
It's still slightly more expensive, isn't it, Jeremy, but not quite as expensive in a comparative sense as it used to be.
Yeah.
So therefore, almost by definition, the attractiveness of offshore companies for owning UK residential properties kind of gone back up the agenda. It went right down the agenda. It's now drifted back up slightly. Yeah. I think my conclusion is quite simple, really. Two things. Find out the client's circumstances, do the maths. And the answer won't be obvious, but it will give you enough information to be able to advise a client.
Yeah.
Great. Well, thank you very much. A lot to think about for clients and their tax advisors.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Pleasure.
Thank you very much.